What's up, Piper friends? Welcome to Tim's School of Pipes, and class is in session. Today, I want to start a new series of videos that I'm going to call Leaf Studies. What we're going to do in this series is take a deep dive into the blending component tobaccos in our pipe tobacco blends. For example, Latakia, Perique, Cavendish, Virginia, the different varieties of Virginias, Orientals, Burleys. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the history of this tobacco, the curing processes of these tobaccos, the tin note, the flavor profile. We're going to smoke it on its own so that we can determine what it tastes like and then better be able to pick it out in our blends when we are smoking them, which I encourage you to do. Today, we are going to start with Perique, the red wine of pipe tobaccos, the truffle of pipe tobaccos. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people like it in small amounts, some people like tons of it. We're going to take a deep dive into it. Then maybe to wrap up this whole series, we will try to make some different blends using these different component tobaccos. So I've written some things down here, so forgive me if I look at my notes. I was, after all, a science teacher for 20 years, so of course I wrote some things down because I don't want to forget. Perique is considered both a process and a type of tobacco. So Perique is essentially made from burley tobacco. It's used as a condiment tobacco in blends. In other words, it's used in just small portions rather than as the base or primary component of a blend. Perique is grown and processed in only one place, and that is St. James Parish, Louisiana. Now, we have two types of Perique. It's all processed in St. James Parish, all of it. But what we call St. James Perique is also grown in St. James Parish and processed in St. James Parish. Then we have what we call Acadian Perique. And Acadian Perique, while it's processed in St. James Parish, it's a blend of tobacco. Some of the tobacco is grown in St. James Parish, and then it is supplemented with tobacco grown elsewhere. The person credited with inventing, if you will, or creating Perique tobacco is Pierre Chenet. It's named Perique because allegedly that was Pierre Chenet's nickname, was Perique, and so it's called Perique tobacco. So let's talk a little bit about the process of creating Perique tobacco. First, it is hung upside down to dry. Then it is wetted, and it's not just moistened a little bit like most tobacco to make it supple. It is wet, very wet. Then they roll the leaves into about 1 pound bundles that they call torquettes, and then those torquettes are packed into whiskey or bourbon barrels, and they are compressed under oak blocks and screw jacks under immense amounts of pressure, up to 30 tons of pressure. And the reason they do this is to get all of the air pockets out of the tobacco leaves and start the anaerobic fermentation process. And to do that, you have to get all the air out. So they leave the torquettes under this immense pressure for 90 days. And then they remove the tobacco and re-aerate it, work it by hand to introduce some air to it. And then it goes back into the oak barrels and it is compressed again for another 90 days. After the 90 days, it's taken back out, re-aerated, and then put back. That process of taking it out, re-aerate it, and then putting it back is called turning. So the Perique tobacco is turned 3 or 4 times. It takes 9 to 12 months to create the finished Perique product. This anaerobic fermentation occurs because there are still some yeasts left in the barrel from the whiskey or bourbon fermentation process. And this anaerobic fermentation process creates similar notes that we would find in red wine. This is why I consider Perique the red wine of tobaccos. We get dark fruit notes and chocolate notes that you might associate with a red wine. It also has a very savory, earthy characteristic that you would associate with red wine. So let's talk about the tin note. The first thing most people are going to smell is kind of a vinegary, ketchup-y note. And then if you go a little deeper, you're gonna pick up some dark fruit notes, kind of like prune, some mushroom type notes. Okay, that's gonna be the tin note. Now, the flavor profile of Perique is what we call umami, which means savory. It's meaty, it's cheesy, it's mushroomy. If you smoke Perique by itself, which we are about to do, you're going to detect some fruity notes, some red wine type fruity notes, some cherry, chocolate, earthy notes, maybe a little bit of soy sauce, mushroom. But where Perique really shines is when you combine it with other tobaccos. It enhances and brings out the flavors of those other tobaccos. It's kind of like salt. When we use salt in cooking, it's not so much to introduce the flavor of salt as it is to bring out the flavor of the base primary components. We use Perique in the same way. A little bit of Perique added to a blend tends to add a peppery type note that we often can detect on the retrohale through our nose. We get that little tickle, that little peppery tickle. That's the Perique talking to you. And in small amounts, it also introduces kind of a stewed plum, or to me it's a prune type note. You add higher quantities of Perique, it really introduces some complex flavors to the blend that we wouldn't normally otherwise have. It introduces that mushroomy soy sauce, almost a stone fruit type characteristic. It has its own profile, and yet it creates notes that don't exist among tobaccos by themselves. Now, Perique was on the decline for decades until 2005 when Mark Ryan of Daughters and Ryan purchased Poche Farms in Louisiana. Before that, there was only about 500 pounds of Perique tobacco being produced a year. Since then, there is 80,000 pounds or more of Perique being produced annually. We really owe a great deal of thanks to Mark Ryan for saving Perique tobacco for us, because not only is it a beautiful blend component, but it is a way of life and an industry for the folks there in St. James Parish. So thank you, Mark Ryan. So there you go. That's a little bit of the history, the process, the tin note, the flavor profile. Now what I want to do is pack some of this up. Let's go outside and smoke it by itself and talk a little bit more about it. All right. So some people might say I'm absolutely crazy for smoking Perique straight. But it's in the name of science here, people. This is leaf studies. So the first half of the bowl was very peppery on the retrohale, kind of harsh. But now that I'm about halfway through the bowl, I'm really getting those umami, savory type notes, mushroomy, leathery. And if you sip it ever so slightly, which I highly recommend you do with Perique, you're really going to detect those red wine fruity notes. Every once in a while I get a little bit of zesty cherry, some plum, prune, kind of like a stewed fruit type note. Still, you can still detect that zing, almost not quite gingery, but peppery, I guess, on the retrohale. Very savory, mushroomy. Every once in a while, a bit of a soy sauce type note. Earthy. It's very good, actually. I quite like it just by itself. Very red wine, very much truffle. Along those lines, I encourage you to get some Perique, some blending Perique. Try it on your own. See what it tastes like on its own. Then maybe mix it with some Virginia or some Latakia or something else and see how that enhances the flavor of the Virginia or the Latakia, and try it in different amounts. Try a small amount of Perique and then maybe a little bit more. There you go, boys and girls. This is the first episode of Leaf Studies. I wanted to talk a little bit about Perique today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, I appreciate you for watching. Give me a thumbs up. Drop me a comment down in the comment section. Let me know what you think about Perique and if you've tried any of it straight on its own. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. Just click my picture right over there. That's it for this episode of Tim's School of Pipes, boys and girls. Class dismissed.